fact, I'm 75 years of age at the moment, and when I was captured, if I recall, I was around 22 years of age. I served throughout the World War II, the whole duration, in the 4th Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment, which was in the 54th Infantry Brigade, which was part of the ill-fated 18th East Anglian Division. And I was a private soldier. They choose not to promote me, I think very wisely. They lost enough without me being promoted anyway. So that's really simply what happened there. We did initially 8 weeks training at the Essex Regiment, and men from all over the home counties and the London and South End area, all over from Essex, and then we were drafted out after 8 weeks to various units, particularly in the 18th Division, to make it up to wartime strength. But at that stage we hadn't fired a gun. We learned how to salute, but I don't know how to answer that one. That's a very good question, how we were first heading for Singapore. Well, in point of fact, Harry, we were trained in the United Kingdom for desert warfare. And I understood then, and I understand even today, that the object was that because of the tremendous German submarine attacks throughout the Mediterranean and other areas, the 18th Division troops were being taken a long way, practically 2/3 the way around the world, to come up from Cape Town, as it were, along the coast, the African coast, through the Suez Canal, into Cairo, and then finally into battle in the Middle East. But as a few days out of Singapore, we were on American troop ships, and America wasn't in the war. We transferred at Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. We had a British escort, but American troop ships. And I might add, at that stage the Americans weren't very happy because, you know, us limeys and the fact that they weren't involved in this war, and it wasn't their war anyway. But it all changed on the morning. The radio said that Pearl Harbor had been attacked by the Japanese. Suddenly we all became great buddies. And to our surprise and dismay, if you like, we British troops were informed by officers speaking on the Tannoy system that the whole of the 18th Division was now being diverted from the Middle East to the Far East to try and hold the Japanese who were pouring down Malaya. That was how we first actually heard that we were heading for the Far East. And the 53rd Brigade, which was ahead of us, there was the 53rd, the 54th and the 55th Infantry Brigades, all formed part of the ill-fated 18th Division. I call it ill-fated because that indeed is what it was.
Obviously at one point you were expecting to be going in a certain direction.
And suddenly we were diverted. Yeah, yes, we were trained for. I mean, we had no idea, no thought, never entered our minds. We were trained to fight the Germans, and we thought, you know, we would have been the nucleus of what became the famous Desert Rats, but of course it was never to be. We would have headed to the Far East, the whole convoy. And so we found ourselves one day in the Sunda Straits between Java and Sumatra, and it's a beautiful day, and because of the proximity of the coastline, the convoy was strung out one behind another in a chain. And before the war there was a famous American peacetime liner called the Miss America, and during the war she was renamed the West Point, and she had 5,000 British troops on board. She was heading the convoy. Then came a British destroyer. We had an all-British escort. Then came various other ships. I was on the Manhattan, which was an American cruise liner converted to a troop ship. And behind us was HMS Exeter. Most people have heard of the famous Exeter. And on this day, the paravans were out because of the mines, and on this day, we seemed in a straight line going through these narrow straits, racing for Singapore. It was a brilliant blue sky, and I understand, unhappily at that time, the seas were full of sharks, which didn't make us very happy. And from out the sky came aircraft in the distance, and we thought, the Royal Air Force has come out to greet us, to escort us in. How wrong we were. 5,000 faces on every troop ship looked up and waved, and down came the bombs. They were the first 27 Japanese bombers came out to greet us in. We didn't know at that time that we hadn't any air support in the air. the Royal Air Force had been so depleted, all the main aircraft had been taken to the Middle East and was fighting here in Europe. This was obviously why Emperor Hirohito decided now was the time to attack. Great Britain was on her knees, now was the time to stab them in the back. And up to a point he was largely right. So there we were without air support racing for the island. And the first ship to open fire was HMS Exeter. She brought one down, much to our amusement and enjoyment, I would think. And the ships rocked as the bombs hit the water. Miraculously, they were aiming badly, and none of us were actually hit at that time. Although in the early hours of the next morning, when we arrived at Keppel Harbour, the Empress of Asia took 6 bombs straight down the decks, and we saw our first real taste of war, with men screaming on fire, jumping in the water, the ship heeled over in a commercial harbour. Our ship took 1 bomb, which ironically I understand killed 7 sailors and 7 of our guys from our unit. As we raced ashore, it was being brilliant sunlight again. In the early hours of the morning, Singapore was under a heavy attack. We could see flights coming in. I counted them in V formation, 27 Japanese bombers, always 27 Japanese bombers. Never anything from our side because we hadn't got anything to send up. In fact, the 3,000 Royal Air Force ground troops were sent up to fight with us up the front lines with no weapons. It's a silly situation. We, off the ships, the Australians were waiting on the docks with transport, on the transport, rushed across the island, which was under attack, and we were heading across the straits into Johor as far as Batu Pahat in Malaya, where we had to get off, and we began to see the real horrors, men coming back wounded, cut up, had weeks of fighting, and all the time was this aerial bombardment. The Japs seemed to have it all their own way, and we were in a pretty sticky situation at that stage.
So you actually landed in Malaya rather than on Singapore?
No, we landed on Singapore and we were rushed across the island, across the straits into Malaya. We didn't get very far. We got up as far as Batu Pahat, and then we had to withdraw immediately because the Japs were behind us. And then became the horrific, we simply had to get back. In the end, some of us more or less swam, some ran. We had to leave our wounded, and at one stage we left 100 wounded who, one survivor said that the Japs executed most of them and laid them out, and they had light tanks they brought down the mainland and they ran over the remainder of them. There's one survivor in the world, one Australian, who still tells the story today. And when we were treated to the island, ready, of course, for the battle, the actual 17-day bloody battle which took place. Were we prepared? Quite frankly, as ordinary human beings, we had time to pick up our senses back on the island, and we were horrified, and myself in particular, to think there was no defences as such, there was no airfields. It seemed an island of golf courses and hotels. There was no even any Dannet wiring on the beaches, nothing. I understand that at Changi, on the other side of the island, was these naval guns pointing out to sea, and they couldn't be reversed to fire up country. They were blown up by our own people in the end. So here we were, thrown in, the whole of the 18th Division, thousands of small men thrown in. I don't know the real reason even to this day, except to make a show, to hold up an army that was already there anyway, and without any air support. Which is not meant to be disrespectful to the Royal Air. God knows a few planes that were there were shot down quick enough, the old crates we had, but we hadn't got any Spitfires or Hurricanes out there. Nothing was there. It was all in the Middle East and in Europe. Obviously, we were caught napping, very unprepared, and to this day, I am amazed, and I think all my comrades are, that the British Foreign Office, the British War Office and the Intelligence Service must have known all this. Here was a thing that Mr. Churchill, Sir Winston Churchill, described as a fortress, the fortress that never was, as Russell Braddon said, the naked island without any defence. And here we are throwing in more troops, having already lost the battle anyway, to be slaughtered and sent to prisoner of war camps. We were only there about 3 weeks or so before the end came. And as the battle progressed, of course, things got rapidly worse because the Japanese came on the island in the early hours one morning, and the bombardment that they put up, we couldn't match anyway. Because they were so strongly supported, they were bombarding the city of Singapore behind us. They were flattening that, wave after wave of Japanese aircraft, always 27, flying in a V formation. And it was just a hopeless situation. And I actually fought the 4th Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment. We were supported by the Cambridgeshires and the Norfolks. We were actually fighting, of all places, on this very beautiful golf course called the Bukatima Golf Course on the island of Singapore. And I will never forget Friday the 13th of February 1942. We lost so many men. The slaughter was that bad. They were just the other side of the golf course and we were here. And our colonel decided we should have a bayonet charge, but he'd obviously lost his reason, because there was no way you could bayonet charge across that. The field of fire was that bad. Men were being cut to ribbons, and we had our first real taste of how bad, how horrible, and how futile war is, and the horrors of war at that stage.